Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Waiting List podcast, and today we welcome back Cole Pennington from HODINKEE. Welcome, Cole.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
I am, of course, here with my co-host, the indomitable Lung Lung, and quote master, James Bond, Alex Lau.
Was all these adjectives going along here?
Yeah.
Sort it out.
Last time we covered an extensive part of HODINKEE, which Cole Pennington was gracious enough to share. Today, it's more about Cole himself. For all those listening, we're looking to reach 1,000 subscribers for Christmas. So do us all a favor and please subscribe. Give us 5-star reviews if you like the content. Oh, and one more thing, we have a giveaway this episode. So to learn more, you make sure you listen to the end. Right, so let's get into it.
What is this? Do I get that gift? What is it?
Well, you clearly spent
you are
no
the
effort
gift. You are part of the gift, Alex. We're giving Alex away for dinner. No one's going to sign up for this.
No, it's zero, literally.
You're gonna lose subscribers now.
Exactly. What? Taking Alex for dinner? No thanks.
Let's bring those subscribers back. Like, Lung Lung's going to go dinner for somebody.
That'll work. All right.
Right, let's get into it. I met you, Cole, in Shanghai and learned very quickly that you had spent some time in Thailand, I believe. And, you know, you seem to have a very warm affection to the Far East or the East. What is it that you love about here?
Well, actually, yeah, I will be honest for sure. No, not really. I mean, no, but I think so. A few things. I'll start from like the most questionable aspect. I like that the rules don't apply to me in these societies. People just kind of treat you as like, you know, there's this society, this silo of rules and culture, and then there's this guy who none of that applies to, you know? So like, you can kind of just not get away with anything, but like, you just don't have to follow the cultural norms, and no one expects you to either. And I like that. I think that allows you a lot of lateral movement to experiment
Freedom.
with. Yeah, exactly. Freedom. Like here, you don't even have that, right? You kind of have to follow and fall into a set norm. Where over there, you can do whatever you want, you know, like, and it's cool. No problem.
So in that light, do you have a problem like holding down a job then? Like, because like, no, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but you're clearly somebody that doesn't like complete structure, you know, like around you.
No, I don't have that problem per se. But
Not yet.
Not yet for sure. But yeah, I would say that what is good is here. You're right. So you're touching on something very interesting too. Here, you kind of need to do like a full-time job, whatever, because you need health insurance. You need a place to live, kind of things like that. I kind of liked the freewheeling nature of life over there, specifically Thailand. I think developing countries in Southeast Asia, you can do this more so than, let's say, Japan or a hyper-developed nation, like Korea as well. But yeah, I like that. I like that if you have an idea, like something I did over there, which I just simply could not do over here. I used to go to airplane junkyards and get like ailerons and flaps and stuff and weld up furniture like tables out of airplane wings. And
that's really cool.
Yeah, like really cool stuff. And it was a cost of labor is cheap. You know, the minimum wage in Thailand's like $10 a day. It goes by day, not by hour.
Wait, for a second, I thought you were the one doing it, but you're actually standing there telling me.
Ordering people to do it for you. Right, do that shit, do this.
Typical white guy, typical Caucasian guy going to the colonizing the Far East.
To a degree. So yes, it started out I was doing it, but then like there are certain things you just can't do that are cheaper and easier, and someone else specializes in it. But stuff like that, I use that as an example. Like
it's always good to take advantage of the cheap workforce, isn't it, Cole?
Hey, it is. I would say you're providing someone else a job. So that's a good thing, you know.
Well, you clearly touch on freedom. Having been brought up in England, uh, and now, I'm based in Shanghai. I've been here for 6 years. I have a good comparison between what you'd say the two systems.
Mm,
And I would definitely say there's way more freedom in China to do
mm,
what you want to do, even say what you want to say, right?
yeah.
How it's painted, totally different. I am so much happier here. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Looking back on my time, I personally make it a goal to be happy wherever you are,
Yeah.
or like take the
Yeah.
best of what's around, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And like if you're unhappy somewhere, that's your problem, right? Like you have to fix it. However,
Agree.
I will say that the runway of things that are interesting or things to engage in or whatever is much longer over there, I found. Here it's rather stay in your lane is kind of the thing here.
Mhm.
Over there are no goddamn lanes.
Yeah, there isn't. It's really, and it does take a while for you to get out that mindset of being laned and pigeonholed
Mm.
to realize and open your brain up. Oh my God, I can really do anything I kind of want. It's a little bit, I don't want to say wild, wild west, but
It's
it's
wild
just a
wild
different
east.
system. Yeah, wild, wild
Yeah.
east. Yeah. Right. So, how did you end up being assigned the Oris project to Shanghai? And actually, how did you end up in Thailand?
Mm. Okay. Well, Thailand came first. I ended up over there because in college I was doing like co-op programs. You kind of work and study. I was doing like a shadowing, like an internship, right? Like a heavy internship in commodities trading. Absolutely the most boring thing ever. At a place called Constellation Energy in Baltimore, on like the Central America sugarcane analyst desk and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And this was right in the wake of I graduated 2010, but like this was in the wake of the financial crisis here in 2008. That internship was supposed to turn into a job. They would hire you after you graduate, kind of thing. Because of the economic conditions at the time, they stopped that and said like, no, actually, no job. Sorry. So I went to my career resources center at my college, and they said, we have this program where you can go teach English in Thailand for a year, because the school I went to was like Jesuit, which is like a religious affiliation, but it's not religious at all. Just so you know what I'm talking about. But
It's a cult.
the it kind of appears that way. So basically, they're like, hey, you can go teach English over there. We have this affiliation with this university, which is yeah, you can do that. So I was like, you know what? Why not? Let's do it. And so literally the day after I got done with school, I was on a plane to Thailand. And at the time, Thailand was going through some major political strife where as I was landing, I remember like seeing the smoke from they were burning a bunch of tires downtown as part of one of the protests. So
Oh yeah.
yeah. So that was like, all right, this is crazy. And then there was a not quarantine, I'm thinking COVID terms, but a curfew.
Yeah.
Yes, at the time, we got there and there are military patrolling the streets at like 10, like making sure everyone goes inside. But also it's not really that serious. And like no one's actually scared of the army or the police or anything. So it was crazy when I first got there. But that's how I ended up over there. And then I ended up staying there because I liked it. It was an awesome time. A few things. There was, like life itself, there's always multiple pieces to the story. And yeah, I got a girlfriend at the time, got a new job, started having friends, a social life, da da da. And I was just like, and then meanwhile, everyone that I graduated college with are moving back in with their parents because there's no jobs or anything. And I'm like, I'm living it up over here. So I stayed and then started writing for fun, then became a copywriter, and then da 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 da, and then uh, just created a life for myself. Yeah, and then just ended up bl- blinking, and 6 years went by, and
Wow, 6 years.
yeah.
So,
So
what
and
made you go
then
back to the States?
2018 when you started HODINKEE, wasn't it?
yeah, um, What made me go back to the States? Well, I guess eventually everyone kind of has to come home. Two things. I would say that the absolute truth of the matter is that I A needed to prove to myself and B everyone around me that, hey, I'm not, like messing around, escaping. Like there's no escapism. Like it's not like I can't hack it in this world, right? In New York City and whatever. It was more just like life was good over there.
So who gave you the pressure? Was that, your friends telling you this, or was it you putting it to yourself? Because there's
Or
no harm in
family.
staying there. Or family, exactly.
All three. All
Oh,
three.
right.
So yeah, definitely family. Also, like imagine you graduate college and then you literally keep in mind the West looking at the East is a lot different than the East looking at the West. So like you go over to like Thailand, which has its interesting quirks and its reputation already, right? Then you just disappear. Like, yeah, sure, I did good stuff there. I worked for big Fortune 500 companies, whatever. But it was more like, all right, you're out of sight, out of mind. You're not present. Well, everyone else is, doing things like buying houses, having families, rising up in their careers. So I kind of, at some point, needed to come home and check off that box and A, prove to myself and everyone else, like, hey, you can do this, or like. So that's actually what brought me back home. Plus, in Thailand, you can make it so far, and then you really need to. There's a little gap between here and there, right? So I came home to recalibrate, make some moves here, and then I ended up staying because I got the job at HODINKEE. But yeah, so that's really why I came back. But also just sometimes you just know. You kind of know when to make the move. I'm sure Daniel, you have a similar situation. You said you've been back 6 years in China.
I mean,
But he plans to stay there. That's a difference.
first of all, like you did well for 6 years because Chinese mothers wouldn't let that shit happen, man. Like they'd be putting you back after 3 years or 2 years. I don't plan to go back to the UK.
Yeah.
So it's something that we have discussed in previous podcasts, but you're very clearly like American, right? You're a white Caucasian guy living in America. You know where your home is.
That's me.
It's never been that clear cut for someone like me
Right, like
because
third
although
culture kid.
yeah, because like you walk down the street, just telling someone yesterday, you have the British passport, you speak English, you go to the first Englishman and if you asked him, you said to him, oh, hey, dude, am I Chinese or am I English? What do you think he's going to say? He's going to say, you're Chinese, dude. Like, what's wrong with you? Are you dumb? Right? So even if that culture that you so want to be part of doesn't accept you, why do you even see yourself as part of that culture? And basically, quickly realized that I don't really have a place I call home. Thankfully, the internet came by, and I was able to find people with a similar kind of background as me. It was a very small group, but at least that I had a group that I could call my own.
Yeah.
And then after you go past those sensitive years, you have a more confidence, and you end up meeting people wherever. I'm very fortunate to meet Alex and Long Long.
Likewise, thank you.
But it's part of the reason that brings us together. It's a similar kind of background, and it's why Shanghai Watch Gang is as powerful as it is because it resonates with all those kind of people.
Yeah. Which is a growing group of people, a growing segment of society. Maybe not your actual watch gang.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly. Completely right. I mean, people coming that have been educated from the West, it's basically mixed culture kids, I would say.
Yeah.
Or don't want to say kids, people
that
when they come back to China, they know how to do the Chinese way, but it isn't the most comfortable way for them. They're somewhere in between. They know how to play each system, which is what I do. Yeah, to some extent.
Yeah, if you can play both, then that's a good thing, right? You have the advantage,
Well, it's a bridge, isn't it? It's turned out well. Yeah.
This sounds so ignorant for me to say, but I'm so surprised when you said that whole thing about needing to go back because people were getting married, they were buying houses and everything. And I'm just like, well, this is happening for you as well, because it's such an Asian thing, to be able to tick that box at what age and do this and this and this. And I just never expected it from like people in the US to have that
Uh,
pressure.
it's definitely there. That's for sure. It's
Yeah.
definitely there. Yeah. So, and your other question, how did you end up on Oris? That's
Yeah.
it was a pro pilot watch. I like aviation watches, and I also have some experience over there. And I've been to my old job. I used to work for JWT, which is a big advertising firm, which had an arm called Blue Hive. Blue Hive was Ford. So Ford's headquarters in all of Asia Pacific is Shanghai. So we used to go up to Shanghai for work all the time. So kind of had some experience there. So when the ticket came up, like, oh, somebody needs to go to Shanghai to cover the Oris launch, it was an easy pick, you know.
So you knew
So
where like Manhattan was and Big Bamboo, you know, those kind of
what are
bars
the?
were, right?
Don't-
Ah, yeah, nice one. What are those? Nice one.
What
We
are
all know
those?
what they are. Right. So, do you see yourself ever moving back after you've proven yourself in the US back to the Far East? And what would you, what in and if you did, what capacity?
So that's an interesting question. I think I have to leave it too open ended personally, but would I? Yeah, of course, totally. I think we're in the middle of what folks are calling the Asian century, where the exponential GDP growth rate is over there. And to a degree, are we witnessing the decline or the downfall of the Western world? I think that's a little bit overplayed, but there is a bit of truth to it. Um, but that's all like macro level stuff. Just on a personal level, yeah, of course I would. Why not? Like, I, you don't have to start and finish in the same place. You can, you know, go back, forth, wherever. Like, I think if an individual can see themselves as a citizen of the globe, as opposed to just one place, they're all the better. I mean, broaden your perspective, and plus, keep in mind, cost of living in Manhattan, crazy. Uh, it just life is more interesting over there in many regards. So yeah, of
No,
course I would.
I agree with Cole because I think every place has its good and bads, its flaws and things that you find incredibly interesting. I think we should be exploring and appreciating it all because there's never one perfect place, and everywhere
Yeah.
could be technically your home. You just never know
Right.
it.
Yeah, that actually follows on from what I just said previously about not having a home, is that when I do go to a place, I look at what it has to offer me. Is it right for what I need in my life right now? Because nowhere is perfect, but does it tick most of the boxes? And so I never feel I have that emotional attachment to a home. I think my home is my family. And so wherever my family is, that's my home, I guess. Yeah.
Totally.
How was your childhood, though? Like, which part of the US are you from? And for those people who are not familiar, maybe you could elaborate on what that's like or where that is. And well, what's a
Sure.
big part of your interest?
You feel more like an Australian than someone from the US.
Explain that, Alex. Why?
Because Ozzy's a little bit more chilled and relaxed, and Cole is.
Oh, you look like
chilled and
James
relaxed.
Bond more than you do Alex
I'm
Lau.
not.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's like, oh my god. Anyway,
Bond. Alex Bond. So first, well, watches, yeah, watches definitely were. Like I've always been into them. Like I'm sure we all have, at least been into them to some degree when we were younger.
Yeah.
I started, getting into watches like hardcore, maybe around the time I got my license, 16, 17, when I could start working to buy my own watches. But prior to that, it was definitely into them for sure. But like, where do you go to look at them? Because back then you couldn't go on the internet to look at them. So I remember, like, for me, and I've said this before a bunch, but Air and Space magazine, Rolex used to run these ads with Chuck Yeager, the guy who broke the sound barrier, all that stuff. And they used to run these GMT Master 2 ads that I was stoked on. I thought they were so cool, and would go through these magazines to look at the watch advertisements at the time. Where am I from? Mainly New Jersey, which is right outside
Oh,
New York
okay.
City.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know it?
Yeah, I've
You've
been
been
there. I can't remember which part exactly, but I was there because my cousin used to live there.
Really?
And now they moved to Boston, yeah. So I was actually supposed to go last year, actually. But yeah, because of well, yeah, because of COVID, I think make it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Damn.
actually, it was this year. It will be this year, actually.
Yeah,
It's supposed to come
2020.
later on this year, September, but yeah, probably can't make it.
Well, I hope you make it. I hope you make it over here. It's a, yeah. I mean, the one thing that I think at least Hollywood gets right, like our, and this is an opinion, like our biggest export is culture.
Jersey Shore.
Well, okay, that is
It's,
that actually
yeah.
that exists,
Hollywood,
right?
Hollywood propaganda.
Well, Jersey Shore definitely is real. Like that
Yeah,
is
it's real.
100%.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Am I a part of that scene? No.
Yes.
But
Yes, of course. I'm the chief guy of it.
But yeah, basically, like I will say the one thing that it is sort of true, like Hollywood does a good job of spreading what the American experience. The thing is, the American experience is a million different, you know, realities. But you touched on something before. I'm Cole the Caucasian. So I had a pretty, standard situation growing up. Not nothing incredibly, suburb of New York City, um, suburban house, a few acres of land in the back, played soccer in the backyard, had a little garden, worked on
Clarify that
bicycles.
football in the back.
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
a little bit of footy in the back.
Yeah.
So would you say you point back to those magazines that you were reading, which exposed you to watches as how you actually got into them?
Yeah, actually, yes. That was 100% the entree point into the world of watches was advertisements in those magazines specifically.
And so what pieces do you personally like now, and what do you collect?
Collect everything from vintage military, so like mid-century and war era, World War II era, up to modern tool watches. I have one dress watch in my collection. That's it. This Grand Seiko.
Seiko, yeah.
So I don't really do dress that much. I like mainly 60s, 70s tool watches from Omega, and then kind of off brands, like just a basic Lamania branded tool watch, and then
Longines or anything like that?
Yeah, Longines too. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Then modern stuff, I like whatever comes from Rolex Tudor for sure. I think in the tool watch world, they dominate. My everyday is GMT, but
very nice.
also, I like all that stuff.
Because all the articles you mentioned in the previous podcast, they did highlight Rolex a lot in terms of the stories that you mentioned. Did that kind of influence and have an impact on you collecting Rolexes as well?
I wouldn't say I collect Rolex though.
Okay.
And also, this is a good opportunity to talk about the difference between a collector and an enthusiast.
Brilliant. Yep.
So I actually would not call myself a collector of watches because collector is they have a theme to what they collect. If they're a good collector, right? The collection makes sense because there's the thematic tie-in to every piece in the collection. For me, it's more occasion based. Like this one I got as a graduation present from my parents, right? I wear that. This I got from my job. If you notice on the dial, it's signed, right?
Oh my God, cool.
So
for our listeners, because they're not going to watch this on YouTube, what is that one? I saw, is that Tudor?
Yeah, it's a Tudor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a HODINKEE signed one.
That's right. Yeah. So like every watch in the collection has kind of it's not a theme. I'm not the guy who owns every one of this watch. For me, it's more like I'm a watch enthusiast because I enjoy researching, writing about, getting into watches, right? So
your differentiation point is the fact that you see a watch collector more as a person that has a very consistent theme within their collection rather than a more spontaneous, sporadic kind of feeling.
Yeah, and also
collection.
Keep in mind there are a lot of enthusiasts who don't have the means to be collectors, but they're just as into watches as anyone else is, right?
Maybe even
they're
more.
just as, exactly. So like when we say collector, it's not really we shouldn't be so limited to watch collectors only, right? So
yeah. Agreed.
Okay. as mentioned in the last podcast, I watched your Horological Society of New York. That's such a mouthful every time,
It really
right?
is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a mouthful.
Can you think of a new name?
Yeah, it's
It's
HSNY. Yeah,
HSNY, exactly.
yeah, HSNY. And you went to much effort to highlight the grey within war. You know,
Mm.
you even commenced the
Commended or commenced?
no, you actually started the actual presentation with a quote by Eisenhower
Mhm.
about the war and even sharing a personal story about your great grandmother. I think it was your great grandmother or your grandmother.
Yeah, my grandfather. Yeah.
Yeah, grandfather. Would you mind sharing that about how you had a POW or something?
Yeah, yeah. So the story goes, I mean, he tells it too. I'll condense it so it's not, so long, but basically there was a POW camp in America in Mississippi. So keep in mind, I grew up hearing this story, but was always like, yeah, right, like, whatever. But then later on was old enough to learn how to research and how to verify things, and it was all true. So anyway, in Mississippi, where my family is from, there was a POW camp that the Army Corps of Engineers basically there that whole region of the country is a agricultural society, an agrarian society, right? Farming. That's the backbone of that region, Mississippi. So the Army Corps of Engineers had a POW camp where they had POWs digging irrigation systems for them. But here's the thing. Every now and then they would escape. Like one would get away and go into the town or run away or whatever. So I grew up hearing the story about during World War II, a German POW came and when my grandfather was a kid, so great grandmother. Yeah, exactly. So you were right about that. So came and knocked on the door and he was injured and actually asked to like be taken care
Get
of.
assistance, get help. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And my great grandmother actually said, yeah, you can stay the night, and then in the morning you got to get on out of here. Which I always thought was just was crazy. It illustrates the humanity that people go through during these crazy times. So imagine that, like a Nazi potentially. So again, there's a distinction between German soldiers and Nazis, right? But we don't know. He could be either one. And yeah, he came, knocked on the door, and they let him in. And in the height of World War II, letting a Nazi sleep on your floor—that's kind of crazy. So that's the story that I grew up hearing, and then I went back and I researched it, and sure enough, literally like less than 20 miles away, there was a very big POW camp where they had all these guys, and there were other accounts where they slipped into the town where they tried to fake Southern accents to blend in with the rest of society, and it didn't work, obviously. But yeah, so that's that story that I opened with, that, which I thought was an interesting take on. It kind of brings home the idea that anything can happen, and there's an element of humanity that we often, when we look back at these accounts, we forget exists.
I mean, it's a great story, and it's how you started that presentation, and it went on to lead onto 5 or 6 watches that you picked up, where you continue to give a great synopsis on. And they had a consistent theme, which was they were all engraved on the back. And just to tell the other two, basically, he had gone to this air show, I believe. The Cole had gone to this air show, and he had found a guy selling these watches because a lot of people get into costume and they want to look period correct. So they buy these watches, and this guy sells these watches. And Cole basically didn't spend a lot of money, but he picked out these 5 watches. And then his theme was, I'm going to pick ones with engravings. And from the engraving alone, he went on to find the true stories of these people of the engraving. So find the people,
Wow.
right?
Wow,
And
a lot of digging.
a lot of digging. It was enough to hold me for an hour and 15 when I didn't really have an hour and 15 time, but
Busy guy.
just from the engraving, yeah, it was amazing, including people like Waldo Kroner, who was like on one of the watches as Waldo Kroner, and AC Jones. For anyone seen it, you've got to watch it. Are military watches something of high interest to you? Like, what is it about military watches that fascinates you?
I think a few things. I like that they're purpose built. So I will say I'm not like we talked about Roger Smith in the previous episode and so forth. For me, I don't worship at the high priests of horology and so forth, like movement and so forth. That doesn't really interest me or captivate me in the same way that watches being used as tools are, like a purpose built machine to carry out a
Task.
mission per se.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, to carry out a task. So, and I also like about military watches specifically, there is always a story or history built into the watch simply due to the nature of what it's seen or been through because it's made for military duty, right? So that's why I'm drawn to that. I like the utilitarian aesthetic as well as the idea that there's a right tool for the right job, you know, and that's what military watches are made for. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm most interested in that. And also, you can tell a lot about a culture or a unit or a time based on those watches specifically.
Yeah, I learned something from that talk that I had never thought about, never given any thought about, which was why some of these watches, military watches, and probably why it's consistent today, we see a red 12 and
Mm,
then there's no other watches. And you kind of said it in a way that assumed that you would know, but I didn't know.
mm,
And you said like it's because the crown used to be at 12, and when the crown moved to 3, people weren't used to reading it that way, and so it disorientated them. So they cleared it up by making the 12 red.
yep,
Like
yeah, exactly.
I would not have known that unless you had explained that. And it just shows how great a listener I am as well.
That is true, actually.
Oh,
You're a
jeez.
fantastic listener.
Smoke more pipe. Yeah, yes.
But do you think that there is anything out there other than a wristwatch that could or would have told the stories of AC Jones, Fuller Camp, and Waldo Kroner that they could
Mm,
have taken?
interesting, interesting thought. And aside from dog tags, no. Dog tags are the little metal plates you wear around your neck,
Yeah.
your social security number,
Military
name,
code.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sure, if someone found those, but I don't actually know what happens to those once someone perishes. Like, where do they go? Do they get given to next of kin? I don't know.
Mm.
Do people collect them? Who knows? But no, I think it could have only been a watch, believe it or not.
Because another thing that you said was a lot of these watches were engraved because the soldiers went in knowing that they might not make it back
Mm,
and that they wanted to be able to be ID'd and
mhm.
potentially return to their family, have a proper burial, all that kind of stuff. Which means, you know, it's if you actually stop and think about it, that you buy this watch kind of knowing that you might
Yeah,
die
it might be the
is,
last watch you buy.
yeah, right. And that's quite powerful.
Mm, totally,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why it's to me more interesting than just someone going down to the boutique and buying
Mhm.
their sixth or seventh or watch or whatever. So that's
Yeah,
why I'm drawn to these watches
there's certainly a
specifically.
lot of respect you give to the individuals that wore these pieces, Cole. And is that
Mm.
why you find that these engravings particularly piques your interest?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard the term the greatest generation. I mean that's what we kind of revere that last generation of folks who just did whatever they had to do to
Mhm.
get things done and they persevered through things. I think it would probably be akin to the Cultural Revolution, Great Leap Forward, like the folks that lived
Yeah,
through
yeah, you're
really
right. Yeah,
hard
you're right.
times.
Yeah.
Um, there is a generation of people who faced incredible hardship and also experienced triumph. So yeah, I think that that's where the respect comes from and the reverence because that just doesn't exist anymore.
Long and I actually, uh, regularly comment on that because we do spend a bit of time in, well, I'm in China and she spends some time in China. There is that generation that I think probably the easiest way is we go hiking sometimes
Mm.
in Hong Kong and we are dressed in Under Armour, um, the
Lululemon.
latest sneakers, all of that ready to go, right? But that generation, they're literally probably wearing the same shoes that they wore and they just get on with it and walk and hike.
Mm.
They don't care about that. They just
Yeah.
get it done. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and even when you see on the street, like people doing construction or fixing things, they'll be wearing that thing the whole day. They're not totally equipped to do the job, but they get it done. And
Yeah.
I think that's where I have a lot of leniency towards being less judgmental about Chinese, about how, you know, people sometimes see this generation as, you know, unworldly, not cultured, not knowing. One, they didn't have the education maybe that you may have had. Yeah, but certainly the to do attitude they have is far stronger, right?
The
And
gumption,
I think they
can do.
yeah, and I definitely see how, you know, it's unfortunate that maybe they were born in that situation or that time where they didn't have the opportunities or comfort level that we have. But certainly we wouldn't be here also without them. So I think it's very important that we pay respect to those people that, you know, really
And
laid the foundations.
we can learn a thing or two from that, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think, especially with the new culture, I think we're seeing more of a replacement culture than just fixing something. So most things nowadays just get replaced than fixed. So I was speaking to a car mechanic, and it's not like the good old days. And I think wheeler dealers is one example where they get a manifold. They actually don't just replace the manifold; they get it out, they refix it and reuse it again. And so nowadays for car mechanics, they're not fixing anything; they're just replacing bits in.
Yeah.
So I think disposable. But back in the day, like you said, our last generations or generations beforehand, they really spent time to fix things.
It's the modern day consumerism.
Yeah.
What do you think in 10 years' time people are going to think about our generation when they look at our watches? What are they going to pick up from that?
That's
with
a
all the
great question.
RMs and BNF, what are they going to say?
So here's an interesting way to look at it. If we look back 10 years ago, it was pretty ridiculous, to be honest, like what was going on 10 years ago in the watch world. I, at that time, was big into fricker cased divers. So there was a whole generation where like micro brands were actually cool and they weren't derivative back then. They were unique and original. So 10 years time from now, it'll be really interesting. I don't know what themes will emerge. I will say probably 10 years from now, we'll look back and we'll say this is when watches started to become far more homogenous and the market started producing for this, like we talked about earlier, this sort of like the flex culture or whatever, and not necessarily horology for the greater good of horology. I don't know. Hopefully not. Hopefully I'm wrong and we're all wrong, but maybe that's the case.
Right. Going back to military watches, how important were they in the war? Like, I think most of us, as you know, having some knowledge, know that they were, you know, they really rose to prominence in wars. But really, how critical were they, and how did they evolve? Like, I've mentioned the Red 12, but I mean, there's other stuff like because you get trench watches because of the shrapnel. But really, how critical were they in war?
Yeah, absolutely critical, of course. I mean, you know, the part of the reason why the British were so good at colonizing the rest of the world is because they were incredibly organized and regimented. And what allows them to do that?
Masters of
Punctuality.
time.
Yeah,
Masters of time.
exactly. Precisely. So if you just that very little bit alone should shed some light on the fact that this is absolutely crucial in terms of almost everything, running operations, missions, so forth. So, but the other point though, how have they evolved? That is super interesting because now they don't just keep people on time. Like back then, you know, everyone hacks their watch so it gets it to the same exact point in time so that we're all in the same timeline. And then they kind of run things on like what would be called mission elapsed time. So it didn't even really matter like what time it was. It was more like 1 hour from now, 2 hours from now, 3 hours from now, whatever. But now, well, now obviously military watches are G-Shocks for the most part in reality. And marathons. There's a good story you should read. It's about a Marathon MSAR. Marathon's a Canadian company, but they produce watches for a lot of organizations around the world. But I wrote a pretty interesting story on that, covering the history of Marathon and so forth. But back when watches were used as a tool, yeah, GMT watches emerged because of this too. Military time, Anti-reflective coatings were developed because of this as well, like double layer coatings. What else? Sin. So Sin has, and Omega was a pioneer with the Flight Master early on, actually. So not just watches impervious to water pressure at depth, but let's say you're at 35,000 feet and a cockpit opens or whatever. Now it's a vacuum environment. So watches that are vacuum proof as well. So totally hermetically sealed. So like a lot of innovations, at least in tool watches, which Rolex to a degree is one. That's a good example of one that crosses both. The Milsub, I'm sure you've, the
True sub.
Comex 1680s. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 5513, 5517 mil subs. Yeah.
Exactly. So these all come from a very direct brief, which comes from a duty to be performed in a military capacity.
Right. There's also a watch, though, that you mentioned called the watch that won the war. How did this name come across, and which watch is it?
It's the A11, and it's basically the reason why they say it's the watch that won the war is simply because it was ubiquitous. So it's, when we talk about military watches, a lot of times you're not talking about a brand, you're talking about a set of specifications that many brands can build to. So like, for instance, in America, but also England did it with the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen look the same, right? You know what I'm talking about, the Dirty Dozen?
Yeah. I know that is actually one of the questions later. But
well,
no, it's
jumping
fine,
ahead.
because I was going to ask you anyways leading on, just to tell the listeners what that is, because I kind of know what it is, but I'm sure a lot of people don't.
Yeah, so it's a set of specifications that the government develops. They say, we need a watch with a black dial with white numerals, Arabic numerals, because we've decided that that produces the best legibility. We need it to be waterproof to X amount. We need it to be shockproof. Okay, now you have this brief, you build the watch. And they set up contracts with different suppliers. So in the States, it was Belova, Elgin, Hamilton. So anyone can build watches to those specs, and the government will buy those watches and issue them to soldiers. Same thing in England, and I'm sure in the East as well, actually. But that's the watch that won the war is a set of specifications, and that was, given to the majority of soldiers. That's why they say it's the watch that won the war.
So there were Belovas, Hamiltons, and Elgins, basically, with that specification.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you saying that legibility and how that it was, because one of the watches you showed in the presentation actually had Roman numerals on it, and you were saying that this was very rare to come across because Roman numerals are just not legible.
They're not at all. Yeah. Even today, like I find Roman numerals to be like kind
Well, you
of
have
annoying.
to keep doing maths in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, X1. Yeah. Add one or take away one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But in terms of legibility, like most license plates, well, in the UK, I don't know when it was invented, but the most legible colors are actually on the car plates. So the back of the cars would be like yellow and black, and the front is white and black. So I guess it's kind of the combination of the two, isn't it?
Yeah, and I actually get into this in that marathon story. Like,
right.
I personally think black numerals on a white background are the most legible. So white dial watches are the most legible to me. And then you also have, like, the reason Doxas are orange is because color changes at depth, right? So dive watches use different colors because colors perceive differently as you go deeper. So legibility is also changing. So this is what's most interesting to me, is that these decisions in design are based on function, not simply art or pleasurable aesthetics.
So you feel like they have more substance rather than being so fluffy? Would that be?
Hey, you said it, not me.
Yeah. If somebody was going to get into them, get into military watches, what would be the best way to do so?
So that's a great question. So some military watches are ungodly expensive, right? So like the Blancpain 50 Fathoms that early Navy SEALs use. So these are crazy money. But those World War II watches that we're talking about, those are $100, or maybe $100 to $200, because there are so many of them, and most of them don't run anymore anyway. So it's not like you can tell.
They're like broken.
Exactly. They're from the 1940s, right? So that's a good place if you're just interested in having a object that participated in a war, or it's a jumping off point to do some research. But if you want a nice wearable watch, I mean, keep in mind too, as time went on, the watches that were issued changed, and soldiers started buying their own stuff on private purchase. Like we all know the Captain Willard story, the Seiko 6105. You guys familiar with that story?
6105. I
No,
don't know
I
that
do
one.
not know. I don't know that one.
Yeah.
All right, so
Captain
basically,
Willard. Yeah.
oh, actually, the reason you don't know is probably because it's very specific to U.S. GIs in Vietnam. That's it.
Right.
So
Oh.
back during the Vietnam War, it's jungle warfare. These are harsh conditions. They were issued like West clocks and Timex watches that just did not hold up. The crystals fell out, water ingress occurred because you're in the jungle. So soldiers started buying their own watches, and at the PX stores, PX are the little stores on base, post exchange it's called, they would buy, whatever available. And it turned out Seikos started to become the choice of Vietnamese or GIs working in Vietnam. So a specific model, the Seiko 6105, was championed by GIs during that time. And later in the movie Apocalypse Now, have you guys seen or heard of that movie?
No.
Apocalypse
Heard of
Now.
it, haven't watched it.
Yeah.
Went past it yesterday on Chinese Netflix.
I was like, next. It was like, look at this, next.
I'm sorry, but the cover looked a bit shit.
Never judge a book by its cover, or a movie in that case.
Love that quote
So,
by Alex.
that watch was used in the movie, so it got made famous from being used in the movie as well. So
Right.
Anyway, all to say, you can start from civilian side or like actual issued watches for cheap, or you can go all the way up to like mill subs or Seamaster 300s made for the Royal Navy, or Lamanias made for the Swedish Air Force. So there's a huge range, but
or Tudor for the French military.
Yeah, exactly. The snowflake, the Marine Nationale snowflakes. Yeah. So specifically, the French Navy. But yeah,
you're talking about these military watches. You mentioned the story again that I want to just bring up, which, okay, we talked about the watches being used in the World War and, how they were typical for timekeeping. They were so critical, right? And I think I'm saying this correctly, that we forget that these watches also broke. So there used to be two watchmakers with two benches that used to travel with these soldiers in the back to fix the watches. Like, you don't think about that, right?
It's crazy.
But I was like, wow, whoa, like in the middle of a field, there's a guy trying to fix your watch. Like,
yeah. I wish we still had that, right? That would be great. But yeah, literally in the manual, it breaks down how to do field servicing. So it was basically a troop transport. It's one of those big trucks with like a canvas top. In the back were two watchmaker stations, and it literally fixed the watches on the spot. It's crazy, but kind of cool,
So are there any kind of like holy grail military watches out there? Super rare pieces that,
for sure,
tell me which ones they are. So
we'll start saving up some pennies to get
because
them.
like I've got this, I'm not saying, it's probably like bad side of me that if I want to get like something, I want the best. Like, I'll probably skip the rest and just go, I want one piece. I don't want to get all the military watches, but I want one piece, and that's the piece.
Here's something interesting too to keep in mind. Like, what makes it value is tied to the story, and the story is also very specific and unique to a certain country, right? So, like for instance, Seikoshka was the Seikosha predecessor to what we know as Seiko, and they were issued watches. They were issued to the kamikaze pilots. So naturally, a lot of those watches did not survive because a lot of the pilots didn't survive. But basically, like those might be more interesting for a Japanese collector than, let's say, like a World War II watches for an American collector and so forth. But like there are some unequivocal grails, and that's going back to the mill sub. And then, like I talked about, the 50 fathoms. What else would be part of that? Marine Nationale Tudors to a lesser degree, but they're definitely grail worthy in my opinion. But here's the thing: the pattern that we're noticing is these all come out of the Western world, right? Maybe there are some other watches that were made. So actually, Seiko did make some watches for the Royal Air Force, but I'm sure as more scholarship gets done, we will find that other countries and other governments produce watches that were previously unknown. But for the most part, now I would say that the military watch is the mil sub, just because Rolex. That's why.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's actually talking about that. There are some Chinese collectors here that collect Chinese vintage watches, and there are some really special ones. Like when you think about it, you're like, whoa, right? Which actually made me want to get my Shanghai military watch. Because for me, I've always identified with my Chinese culture. So I really
Yeah.
wanted to get a Chinese watch.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
having, I've waited for ever since I got to Shanghai, so 6 years to try and find the right one. And this was special enough. But there's an aviator watch. There's ones with pandas, like the engraving, and a lot of them, like you said, the quality isn't the best, so a lot of them perish.
Oh, okay. Did I say the
Yes.
quality of Chinese watches isn't the best? I did not say.
Daniel's putting words in your mouth, just making clarity.
So, yeah, I think like you're correct. There are some regional things. I mean, I would not have got that probably Shanghai military watch if I wasn't Chinese. So
Yeah. So I would say, like, when it comes to Grail, I mean, Grail, I think Grail should be personal, right? It's your personal Grail. So in your case, that's part of it, right? That cultural connection.
Right. So what about for you? What piece have you come across during your work as a watch journalist that really resonated with you and touched you?
Okay, here's a pretty interesting one. That's pretty cool. So there's an aircraft company called Grumman. Well, no longer. Now they're Northrop Grumman because they merged. But Grumman was out on Long Island, and they manufactured a ton of iconic warbirds up to modern fighter planes, like fighter jets that you see in movies and stuff. I found a watch that was given to a test pilot who put in 25 years of service at the company. So I came across this watch. It was an Accutron Space View. It said, "Thank you for your service, 25 years, Grumman." And because we know it was just Grumman and not Northrop Grumman, that puts it, and we also know it's a Space View, so puts it in the 60s, 70s era. So I found this watch, and it had his name on it too. So I looked up the guy, and turns out he did some wild stuff. He was testing the Grumman Albatross in Indonesia in the early 70s, like doing, field testing of an experimental plane at the time. And also, so Long Island is, it's New Jersey, New York City, Long Island. So it's not very far away. So when I saw that, I thought maybe I can find, maybe he's still alive, but doubt
Wow.
it. But maybe. So I'm not done with this one yet, but I got a lead at least. So that was the most interesting one that stuck out to me, which I thought was just super, super cool because A, it's sort of local to me. B, it's, someone I can connect with.
When you
know, when
say
you-
sorry,
yeah,
when you say
sorry.
you find these watches, where are you finding them?
Got a dealer.
No, actually.
It's like eBay.
Well, yeah, so eBay is a great place to pick up watches like this. But actually, in the city, in New York, we have a group. Well, we did. Corona kind of messed things up a little bit, but basically every other Monday, I would say like 15 to 20 people get together and trade watches, check out watches, sometimes sell watches. And
The flea market.
yeah, kind of,
Yeah.
but more like watch collector focused. Then we also have Red Bar. We have, and also due to the nature of like my job, like people hit me up sometimes, say, "Hey, I have this watch" or whatever. So that's where I find them. Yeah.
All right.
Rarely eBay, but eBay is a good place.
Cool.
When you go on these journeys of finding about the people that own these pieces and you learn about their story, as part of it, you find it totally inspiring for you. And in some ways you try and think, do you know what? I actually wanted to live my life that I want to live my life like that. And this is more evidence to support this is how I should live because these people live like that.
You're getting deep here, but I think you're onto something. I mean, that some To a certain degree, no, for sure. But in others, yeah, of course. Like, imagine, looking at an old 6542, the first GMT master, flipping it over and seeing like the name of a Pan Am pilot who, yeah, maybe was based in New York, but cruised on over to Shanghai in the coolest era of Shanghai, right? Like the 60s.
Well, it's now actually because I'm there.
That's true, actually. Yeah. What a life to have lived, right? Like an international jet-setting pilot back in the day. Like, so yeah, would I like to imagine myself as that? Sure. I hope we all would like to imagine ourselves as doing something great or interesting and so
I
forth.
certainly see you as a traveler because in all the watches that you seem to talk about, even in the presentation, they flew to like on the battleships in Indonesia, I think, in that strait of
Bikini
something.
Atolls. Oh yeah, so the Makasan Strait. Yeah.
Yeah, the Makasan Strait. Yeah.
There is that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they flew, and then they had to get the boat repaired, like potentially in South Africa and all the way
Yep.
back.
And
There's a
Durban.
lot of like travel story in the watches that you talk about.
Yeah, because the people who wore them were doing things that require them to move around and so forth. So, and that's interesting. And like you're talking about Kroner, the Kroner watch, and that was in a firefight. So that was in a firefight in right near Malaysia, Indonesia, and the straits over there. And that guy, so he went all the way, from Southeast Asia. Yeah, like you said, got the boat, got the ship he was on was fixed in Durban, South Africa.
Yeah.
Stopped over in Sri Lanka for a little bit, then made it back to Brooklyn. But after that, there's an even more important or interesting bit was that he went to go see the nuclear tests in the Bikini Atolls.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So the story that inspired Godzilla, which is that's part of it, but there were famous, atomic bombs detonated underwater, and he was there for those tests, and the watch allowed us to know that and piece together that story.
And I want to finish by saying like Cole actually found the grave.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, but that
the gravestone.
I would say
There's a picture of the gravestone, like of Waldo Kroner. He knows where it is. Yeah.
That's not the most interesting story. I will
There
say
isn't there isn't a next of kin though, isn't there?
there for him there was not.
Yeah.
Nope.
You can give the
AC
watch
Jones couldn't that one, but the one that I think I'm most happy about the way it turned out was the AC Jones watch, which
that was a good one. Yeah.
that is in a museum right now. So it's in a museum up in Canada. You can go see it if you want. And everyone was, all the people on the Canadian side were just super, super stoked to get their hometown heroes watch back.
Is that Oakville, right?
What's that?
Was that Oakville? Was that Oakville?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
The HMS Oakville. So it's Oakville, Ontario. So yeah, you should read the story. If you have show notes, you should link up the story because it's too much to explain here. But yeah, that watch.
You guys should watch it.
Yeah,
I think we've teased you enough on it. But I was inspired by the amount of effort that you went through, Cole, to retrace these people's stories. Luckily, I think with two of those.
I think Daniel's signal is getting a little bit off.
Oh boy.
Just wait for him. Just
radio silence.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Back alive again.
I don't know what happened there, but I was just really inspired by how you retrace the stories to very much completion. I feel on two of the people that wore those watches.
Yeah, well, it's not over yet. I mean, I'm still actively doing it all the time.
Still search until you find the answers for everything, right?
That's
so
right. The
just
truth
to finish
is out
off
there.
now, in your video, I want to highlight something you said, which was it was started off as some way to pass some time and do something meaningful. What is meaningful to you? What drives you? What gives you direction? And I ask this because I think for many people, their priority and driving factor is economically or financially related. But if it had been that case, we certainly wouldn't have gotten the wonderful stories that you gave us.
Interesting point. Well, it's certainly not, there's no economics or financial incentives for anything like this. And even for me, watch collecting is not that way. Like, I think we can zoom out and just talk about watch enthusiasm as a whole. This is a good jumping off point for a conversation like that. And if you buy a piece, I think for me, you're essentially buying like this. You're buying a story. You're doing one of two things. You're either inheriting someone else's story and continuing it, or you're starting your own. So for me, like with the watches I showed you here, like every one of them will have something attached to it that when I leave this earth, the watches will not. They'll hang around, right? And the story is luckily will be in there. Like this one, the HODINKEE one that I showed you earlier, we actually put our names in the case back and everything.
Oh, you engraved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that. Yeah.
You sent me a
but-
photo of that a while back, and you said I couldn't share it with anybody.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Well, because like back at the time, so put it this way, like Rolex does not do custom stuff for anybody, right? They just don't do that. So
Yeah, super special.
for them to like, so this watch or whatever, like maybe someday someone will find this and they'll look me up and they will literally hear this podcast. And
If you give it to me, I promise I'll look you up in 50 years.
and they'll hear you guys, and then they'll hear about, you know, what was this weird cross-cultural examination of the watch world like in 2020 in the middle of a global pandemic, where these people are just sitting on Zoom talking about it, and they'll have insight into a world that they would know nothing about otherwise. And they'll look up you guys and they'll see, you know, all these crazy things, and someone will learn something they would have never known otherwise, just simply because of one line of text on the back of a watch. I just think that's awesome. So that is really what motivates me and drives me to keep
Not like
doing that.
leaving your mark.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to leave your mark in a way. So
Right, well, I think that's the perfect way to end this podcast. And
well, all I want to say was he's coming back on is like, and I'm really happy, Cole, that you're championing the watch world and watch enthusiasm. And you know, regardless whether whoever you work for, whatever you keep doing, I think you're always going to be putting out great content and great things about the watch world that everyone needs to understand. So I've got to say thank you very much for that. Really enjoying it.
The pleasure's mine. Yes, no, and I'm stoked to do this. I genuinely excites me, and even more so, it's super exciting to hear that you guys are into it. You know.
Thank you. Well, we've got to get you over here, and we're definitely going to have another episode with you again, hopefully soon.
yeah, not before the quick fire though.
Yeah, not before the quick fire. We've still got a quick fire.
Got the quick fire.
That's it. All right, won't be long.
Number one question.
Sir.
Cole, who is prettier, Cara Bennett or Long Long Ten?
So
Seriously.
number one, her name's Cara Barrett, and so I would say they're equally beautiful.
Diplomatic answer.
Come on, choose one.
No, we'll get another answer off air.
All right.
Right. What's your next article on?
My next article, like literally, is a in-depth piece, like I did for the Datograph, but on the Omega Ploprof.
Okay.
That's the larger one I'm working on, and then I think tomorrow a Fortis or something. Actually,
Oh,
you have to cut
Fortis,
that out.
yeah.
There's an embargo. I shouldn't have said that. Cut that out.
Oh, whatever. Some Fortress.
basically-
Fortress, yeah. Fortress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, when is it out?
Yeah.
Because your episode won't be out for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all good. I think this is coming out like a week or two from now.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
you'll
we're
be
ages
fine,
away.
you'll be
Yeah,
fine,
yeah.
you'll
We're going to be
fine, yeah.
months
Alright,
away.
sweet.
Right.
So,
Watching
yeah.
this.
It's a Fortis and Ploprof. Yeah, the
Person you
next
want to meet the most within the industry and why?
You've met them all, probably.
I've met a lot of people in the industry, yeah, for sure. But maybe Lung Lung and Alex.
Oh, that's sweet.
so
Wow,
sweet.
too kind. Oh, I'll give you a big cash reward later.
Nah, do you know what? He probably just wants to have a little drive in your Aston, mate.
No.
All right, boom.
Anyway.
There you go.
Right. Most underappreciated watch brand.
Underappreciated. Interesting. Maybe Laurent Ferrier on the high end, and on the low end, interesting. Longines.
Oh.
Fair. Alex is a big fan of Laurent Ferrier.
Yeah, because you mentioned like you're not really into like Roger Smiths and stuff. But what made Laurent Ferrier something of interest to you?
Literally his legacy.
Oh,
the prolific
the racing and all
race.
the things
Yeah,
that he's involved
exactly.
in, right?
Yeah,
But you know, he
exactly.
didn't win it. I think it'd be more interesting if he actually won the race. I mean,
To me, winning's not everything.
Yeah,
That's more than I've done.
Right. So, in light of that, what's the most overrated watch brand?
Mm,
opinion. So it doesn't have to be real, but
yeah, no, but I'm actually trying to think. Like, I will say, for a long time, I was not into Rolex, and I hated the hype around Rolex, and I hated the fact that, like, everyone had them. They're so ubiquitous, but you go through a curve where you only get it after you own one or handle one for a prolonged period of time, and you also only get it after you've gone through everything else, and you realize there's a Rolex and then there's watches, and I would say for a long time, the answer I would give you would be Rolex by far. I think it's the most overrated and underrated brand, depending on where you are on the collecting curve.
so maybe the vintage pieces is underrated, but if it's in modern pieces, it's a little bit overrated.
Or quite the opposite. I would say
Oh,
the
okay.
vintage pieces, there's a lot of hype around them, but the modern pieces are just good watches to wear and put your own
Oh,
story in.
interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. Next one, Cadbury's or Hershey's?
The cream, well, for me, Cadbury is only the cream egg, like the Easter egg type thing. And Hershey's
So
is the wide
rich.
variety.
Oh,
But
cream egg is so sweet.
I dig it. So I'm going to go cream egg because I really enjoy that.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Auntie Anne's or Cinnabon?
Ooh, this is really difficult. God damn it. All right. I would say Auntie Anne's is way better in terms of just the variety and the consistency. Cinnabon, you're pretty much limited to having in the morning for breakfast. Auntie Anne's, they have something for everyone all the time. And pretzels beats out Cinnabons.
Right. And the last one, what was your latest wristwatch purchase?
GMT. Yeah, GMT Master 2.
Okay, good piece.
Was my latest, and
that's the one on the Jubilee, right?
Yeah, modern Jubilee. For me, like that watch, I've loved it forever, like since the beginning. And there's a lot. I mean, this is also a space watch too. Like people don't talk about that. Like it has just as strong
Rich
of a
history.
presence. Yeah, exactly. In space as it does on test pilots' wrists, on Pan Am pilots' wrists. Like it kind of covers everything in the tool watch era. And keep in mind, so I don't know if you guys saw, but I did a talking watches with this astronaut, David
Yes.
Williams, and to check it out. But he tells the story about Joel McGinnis, who is a famous diver, who brought one down to the Titanic in a submarine, but GMT Master. Like that watch has history. It's not just a flex watch. Like if you look at it as just a flex watch these days, you're being incredibly myopic because there's an incredible history there. So that's why I'm drawn to it, and that's kind of the only Rolex that I would consider right now.
Right. Well, that finishes the podcast, but we do have a giveaway. The watch stand has graciously decided to support this podcast by allowing us to give away a watch stand. So I think these retail for like, I don't know, $200 or something expensive anyway. Yeah, it's really generous of them. All you have to do is follow the Waiting List Podcast Instagram page, story the podcast either as a screenshot or repost an image from the page, and tag us in that story. And we will pick a winner at random after 2 weeks. And that pretty much ends this podcast. Thank you very much, Cole, for agreeing to do this podcast. I believe it must be close to 2:00 a.m. for you over there.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
And
I learned a lot about military watches, and I'm certainly going to spend some time looking at them. But it was really good to hear your passion in them, and I hope more people, feel the same way.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and hopefully, like you said, I hope folks get into it. And also, I will say, who knows where your readership or listenership is mainly based, but if it is largely in Asia too, there's a lot of work to be done. Like a lot of this stuff is not really known. So get to it. I hope,
Oh, whoa.
Trust
with
me,
your
mate.
support.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Yeah, I got a fire up my ass.
No, but we're
All right.
thankful for all the people like who we've been interviewing and been working with. Everyone's been very supportive and championing what we're trying to do. So I think it's not just us; it's everyone involved who we're doing this with. So yeah, thank you very much, Cole.
I'm not going to give up until I get to 4 on this channel.
There you go.
Yeah, he's my guy. What are you talking about?
Okay.
right.
See you later, guys.
See you guys. Thank you.
See you on the
Thanks
next
for
one.
listening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List podcast.